Okay, welcome back. And it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Cunningham. As I mentioned, we work together here in San Antonio with the enterprise or business that helps put on the Focus In events. We wanted to show you a tool and a system we're calling the Adaptive People Development System. And so we want this to be a supplement to the theory that you've been hearing during this workshop, and also give you a view of how we're taking some of that theory and applying it to practical use cases specific to how businesses are doing skill development, learning and development across their teams. So I'll let Steve take it away. He'll be giving some insight. We'll spend about 30 minutes here, and then we'd open the floor for question and answer towards the end. And if you'd like to learn more, feel free to put your email in at any point during it, and Steve will be giving other information towards the end as well. So thank you very much. Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Ben. I hope everybody is enjoying the session. I've been through the session numerous times, and I always get something new out of it. So I suspect you are feeling the same. We're going to be introducing you today to Adaptive, which is the engagement and accountability system for people development. And in particular, what we focus on at Adaptive is kind of the combination of engagement and accountability and people development, which means that people are actually developing valuable skills and they're being held accountable for those skills translating into better results. That's what we call the adaptive zone. And so, where a lot of organizations live is down here, which we would call the dead zone. There's very low engagement around skill development and growth, and very little accountability. We got organizations where, organizations kind of, as they start their journey, move up into what we would call the fantasy zone, which is where there's a lot of engagement, and particularly there's a lot of content consumption, but nothing is actually happening. So people feel good about what's going on, but nothing is really happening in terms of skill development or better business results. And then you can also go on the other end of things where there's very low engagement in the development process, but it's just accountability. And obviously, in that sense, people end up burning out. So where we want to get folks in organizations is into what we call the adaptive zone. And to kind of put it into context of what you've all been going through for the last couple of days, how do you put PDCA in people development? Because really that is what is at the core of all of this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about how that process and idea maps into skill development. So just to start off with, why your people are not engaged in development, if that is a problem in your organization. So I want you to just consider a couple of things. We've surveyed thousands of team leaders around the world as they've come into our universe during onboarding, and 95% of team leaders say that growth and development is critical for their team's success, not surprisingly. 94% of team members say that their growth and development is critical for their own success. Again, not surprising. What is surprising is that 98% of team leaders admit to struggling to get their team to make time for learning and apply what they learn, or both. So we've got this interesting situation where the team leader wants people to grow and develop. Team members themselves want to grow and develop. The company wants people to grow and develop, but yet it doesn't happen in the vast, vast majority of cases. So we've uncovered a few insights into why this is the case. And at the team level, there tends to be this conversation. So in the chat, if you at any point have had a conversation like what I'm about to show you, I want to see a thumbs up or just a reaction that this kind of maps onto your reality. So typically this conversation goes something like this, where the team member says, I'd love to talk to you about, talk to the team member about their development. And the company has lots of resources available for you. Here's our LMS, here's our content library. And the person says, that's fantastic. I'm always looking for opportunities to develop and grow. So this conversation always starts off with, yes, it's important, and we'd love to do it. Then when you check in and say, well, how's that going? The answer is, well, I'm too busy right now. And then you check in again, how's it going? And I'm too busy right now. I see some heads nodding. How's it going? I'm too busy right now. And then eventually we get down to the point where the team leader concludes, well, you must not be motivated enough to get better then, because here's what I do and you're not doing it. And the team member says, whatever, nobody else is doing this, so why should I? And I've got so much stuff on my plate. I don't even have time for all of this. So if that sounds like a conversation you've had, would love to see your reaction in the chat. So this conversation goes on all around the world, basically every week. So that's what happens at the team level, and at the company level, which is actually responsible for why this conversation happens that way. This is what happens there. So a company's in one of these stages I'm about to articulate. They buy a content library, something off the shelf that they provide to their employees. The result is there's some initial excitement around it, then mostly nothing happens. So if you look at a chart of engagement, it goes up for about a week and then goes immediately almost back down to zero. So the conclusion that the organization makes is, well, that first content library we bought wasn't compelling enough. So we're going to go out and buy another one, and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 as they go churn through this cycle repeatedly. Again, initial excitement, then mostly nothing happens. So the problem that they conclude is the case is that we've got all these content libraries, and people are confused and they need a single place to log in because we've got too many places, forgetting that the actual problem is that nobody was engaged ever. So it's not because there's too many things to go to, it's just nobody was ever engaged. So they buy an LMS thinking that this is going to solve our problem. Again, no excitement at this point because there's nothing new here, and then very low engagement. So the conclusion then is there's not enough structure. We need to organize the content better. I'm going to breeze through the last couple session or stages here. Then they graduate to creating competency models. Again, no excitement, very low engagement. Then maybe we need learning development plans and more metrics, and they do that. Again, nothing happens until at the end of the year. There is a lot of what I've heard somebody say is pencil whipping. So basically just cheating the system. And just to prove a point, it took me about a half an hour to get this certification on LinkedIn Learning, which is Six Sigma Foundations. I know zero about Six Sigma Foundations, and I have this certificate saying that I do. And so this is what happens at the end of the year. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of scrambling to get content, check the box so that I get whatever bonus or whatever I need because of my performance management review. So nothing actually happens. So that's why people are not engaged. So the next question then becomes, well, why aren't your people held accountable for their development? And one of the things that we found through talking to a lot of organizations, especially in the learning and development and HR function, is when they purchased training from us, they said, well, we're going to use this thing called the Kirkpatrick evaluation model to evaluate, whether or not we're getting our return on our investment. And so they would trot this model out. They would say, here are the levels. Reaction 1 is reaction, which is, did people like the training? Level 2 is, did they actually learn something? Level 3 is, did they change their behavior based on what they learned? And level 4 was business results. So as a model, that looks fantastic. It seems like the right way to think about growth and development. And the challenge is that what we found out through going back to these clients and saying, how are we doing, is that they had no idea across all of the things that they do, what behaviors are changing and what results were occurring. So they actually just measure level 1 reaction when they say they want level 4 results. And so what I want to describe to you now, and this is where we're going to bring in the PDCA, is what typically happens at a company as it relates to PDCA. And the reason why nobody's held accountable. Well, the plan portion is most companies don't have a learning and development plan for their employees. And if they do, it's usually an annual plan with very little objective measures to hold people accountable to. So there, in essence, there is no plan to hold people accountable to behavior change and results. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is that most companies actually just struggle to get their people to consume content and spend all of their efforts trying to solve that issue, but it's the wrong end of the problem. The problem isn't that people are not consuming content. The problem is that people don't know what behaviors they need to change. So there is some doing around consumption of content, but no doing around behavior change and business results. In the check column, and most companies, the check is the check the box exercise and people development review at the end of the year, where there's a flurry again of content consumption and pencil whipping and all of that kind of stuff. So the check happens once a year, which we all know is not sufficient to create any change whatsoever, unless you're talking about something with a very long time horizon like business strategy. And then finally, there's no connection between if you somehow miraculously get through those first 3, there is no connection between the learning and their daily jobs. So practically speaking, nothing gets improved. So we end up with what we would call wasted learning. This is all a bunch of effort, which ends up in no positive result for the organization, for the team leader, or for the individual. So what might things look like if you had a system that solved for PDCA? And that's what we want to talk about here right now. And we would call this adaptive learning. So for the plan, you'd have a yearly plan broken down by month, where all of the skills that you would want somebody to develop in were clearly laid out, like leadership skills and soft skills, role skills, and compliance issues. All those things being accounted for. You have a scheduled team development time monthly in everybody's calendar, or else what we also learn is that if you don't schedule time for these things, they don't get done. And so we would call that your skill plan. For every individual should have a skill plan mapped out by month throughout the year. The D part, the do, is so there's clear objectives to complete, which always include applying it to the job, and they know that they're going to be held accountable publicly, so the do stage actually gets done. And what they're making progress towards is not consuming content or embedding knowledge in their head, but they're making progress towards applying it to their role, and then also making that connection between what am I doing and what results are coming out on the other end. And we have created the system and the functionality to allow you to be able to do that, not only for technical skills like how do I operate this machine, but for more soft and leadership skills where usually there is no objectivity around it. So that's the key here in this do step. The C step is, the check actually has to happen. And so we've created a cadence of this monthly development meeting run by each team leader where the plan versus actual is reviewed for each person on the team. So you're publicly reviewing how are we progressing, both individually and as a team, in the skills that we said we wanted to develop. And then finally, the A, before the end of the monthly team development session, you open up a new loop. So new skill goals are set by each person, and then whatever learning that occurred in the previous month that created tangible business results for the company is shared. So there's a plan made for sharing that out to the organization, and or is standardized if it's something that we want to train everybody in the organization how to do. So all of this is old hats to you as you've been through this program, but what's not clear to most people is how this PDCA loop relates to the people development process, especially once we move beyond the shop floor. So it's not complicated, it's fairly straightforward, but it mostly doesn't happen. And so we've created a platform where we enable this to happen at any level in the organization. And we call it the adaptive system for people development, where we're focusing on both engagements and accountability. So there's a few things that you would get that make this process easier for you, and that's really what we're trying to do, is how do we make this easy for you to create and deploy in your team or your organization. So we've created a library of pre-built content specifically around leadership and soft skills, which are increasingly becoming important in organizations. So you have a pre-built library of things that you can create a curriculum around for your team as you work throughout the year. So you would simply go in, choose the competencies you'd want your folks to be trained on, and now you've got the start of your plan, and then you would fill in for those particular roles that you have on your team. Here are the skills that relate to your role. So whether they're shop floor folks who are learning how to do particular procedures on the line, or if they're office workers where they have specific things that they need to get done to add value into the company. So then once that is created, there's a repository of this content where there's a content library associated to the skills that are related to those roles. So we're not overwhelming people with here's an enormous library of stuff that most of which has no bearing on you getting better in your role or future roles, so that they're able to be focused on here are the things I need access to in order to get better myself. Then there's the ability for you to host what we would call team classes, and this is the the development review that you would host every month. So you can schedule these into people's calendar and into the platform so that they know how to attend these things and then what the theme of that month is going to be. We've also created, one of the challenges for leaders is how do I create an agenda for a learning interaction that everybody is highly engaged in. And so we created something called Action Class, which would be part of your development review monthly, where we have pre-built content into the library that is provided to you, where you're able to watch a video, a quick video on a particular leadership or soft skill. We give you some questions for people to answer, and I'm going to show you in a second what those questions are, because this is where the objectivity around these leadership and soft skills come from. There's collaboration, so everybody has to participate, and then there's a group discussion at the end. And we get all of that done if you really are focused, and you get this done in half an hour, which leaves a lot of time in the beginning and the end of the class to do your accountability in your planning for the next month. So the questions we ask folks, especially as it relates to these soft leadership skills, is, what is your one key takeaway? So one of the things we've noticed in organizations and in general how people learn is that the folks who are laser focused on, I'm just going to take one thing away from this training and I'm going to go do it, are the ones that are successful. Those are the ones who actually implement what they do. So we ask them specifically, not give me your 5 takeaways or your 10 takeaways. What's one thing you're going to do, which leads into what's the one action you're going to implement? And then finally, what is your skill goal? And this is where they're creating an open loop, and that gets closed in the subsequent months in the check-ins that you have. So there's a grading scale of 1 through 5, starting at novice. And the important issue for us in this is that you only get to level 1. You don't get beyond level 1 for consuming more content. That's where it starts and stops. If you consume content as it relates to negotiation or time management or some other soft or leadership skill, that's your level. And you don't get to advance beyond that until you apply what you learned to your job. The third level is you've got a documented method for implementing it. The fourth one is you can make a proof that there's a connection between that method and the desired results. And then finally, the expert level, which is you're willing and able to teach this skill to others, which then encourages folks to become peer trainers for other people in the organization based on the skills that they are actually developing. So not only does it create the closed loop mechanism as a team, you're also developing in-house experts on skills across a wide range of things, not just technical skills, but again, leadership and soft skills. So the mechanism that actually gets people to implement this in the system is something that we call a skill journal. And by the way, you could implement this on paper equally, probably not equally as well. This is obviously going to make your life easier, but the idea here is that you just want to make sure that this is the process that you're having folks work through. So in this skill journal, which would live under your skill plan, basically your current level is here. This is your target level. So in the session itself, people are going in, setting their target. So I want to go from a 1, 2, or 3 on difficult conversations by Friday, February the 19th. And then any to-dos that I'm going to have related to that would go in. And so what that gives you as a leader is the ability to see in a view that you are all probably fairly familiar with, which is a team matrix, how folks are doing as it relates to the goals that they're setting. You can see where people are behind. You can see where people are doing very well. You can identify which experts we have on our team as it relates to these particular skills, and all of the other things that you would use a cross training matrix for. And what it gives the company is the ability to look in and see across the organization who are our experts in what areas, who can train other people in the organization. And for learning and development and HR folks, the ability to see where do we have skill gaps and how can we close them. And so again, we're really just embedding this entire PDCA loop into the process of people development, which, as you know, is one of the most powerful underpinning methodologies to Lean, and really giving it life in the people development process. And at the end of the day, what you get is to understand across the organization which individuals have which skills. We've got some objective measures in the system. We've got a skill score, a leader score. The skill score is what is the combination of all the skills that you've accumulated over time. The leader score is how well do you do developing the people that sit underneath you in the organization. Results, which is what skills have you developed that can tangibly be shown to prove business results, and then finally your engagement score in this entire process. So there's a lot of elements that end up being able to create an objective view of how folks are progressing. It's engaging for them because they can see actual progress being made week over week, month over month, and again gives the entire organization clear and measurable metrics to be able to judge the effectiveness of any training that happens in the organization. So with all that being said, I want to be cognizant of our time here. Just if you are interested in learning more, we're going to open up for questions here in a second. If you're interested in learning more about how to do this in your organization at a more deep level, we have what we call our People Development Bootcamp. It's a multi-session deep dive into the principles of PDCA applied to people development. You're going to get access to our staff experts who will help you create and launch your PDCA-driven people development plan, and access to the adaptive platform to track and measure the results of your program with your team. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you just throw your name and email address into the chat before we close up with this session here, and we'll be happy to follow up with you and provide you with more information about that. And so with all that being said, we'd love to open up the chats, post any questions if you have in the chat, or if you prefer, and this would be my preferred method, if you want to just throw yourself off mute and ask your questions so that we can interact directly. Okay, so we have a few questions about the slides. I'm sure we'll talk about getting those off to you. Any questions about anything that we've covered here, and as it relates, how do you apply PDCA down into the people development process?
Hi, this is Christy. I do have a quick question. It looked like in the slides that you had an actual technology to help manage this. Now, are you presenting the concept that we can then take and apply, or is there an actual technological solution that helps kind of enable this in any organization?
Yeah, great question, Christy. Yeah, we've developed this solution. So we've developed the technology to enable organizations to do this in response to that challenge that they face. So one of the things that makes this easy to do is to have that visual management system in place, and that the input becomes part of the process. So yeah, this is a technology that we've developed that would be a part of that program.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. What else? Okay, I know you guys have got a lot of information thrown at you over the last day and a half. So I'll give my going once, going twice routine a shot here in a second. Before I do that, does anybody else have any questions about anything that we've shown you here today? Going once. Going twice. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for taking the time with me here today with us. Enjoy the rest of your focus-in session. It's always a transformative experience, so I'm hoping you're taking away a lot of what Mike is teaching you. It really does make a difference. Thanks, everybody.